In this presentation, we're going to look at structures and groupings. So what we're going to learn are the different ways in which staff and businesses can be structured, distinguish between the different structures that are available, and discuss the different ways in which the functions of an organisation can be grouped, and distinguish between two different concepts, downsizing and delayering, which is something that pupils do tend to get mixed up with. And by the end of this, we'll be able to discuss different ways of structures, distinguish between different structures, and look at the different ways in which organisations can be grouped, and we will be able to distinguish between downsizing and delayering. Structures, therefore, are the way in which organisations manage to fit their staff into the organisation, the way they choose to do that. And the first type of structure are tall or hierarchical structures. With tall structures, there are many levels of management. Managers have a narrow span of control. Now, span of control means that these are the number of people that any manager has responsibility for. So in a taller structure, because there are a larger number of managers, you will find that each manager is in charge of fewer staff, which gives them this thing called a narrow span of control. The tall structure, as you can see kind of from the diagram here, will be a sort of tall, thin, triangular shaped structure. There will be a long chain of command, and what we mean by that is that it will take some time for decisions to be fed down through the different layers of the organisation and for any communication to go back up the way. So the long chain of command will go from the top of the organisation right down to the bottom. So there are a number of layers to go through before that can happen. It is therefore going to be time consuming for instructions to be passed down. So just looking at some advantages and disadvantages, we've probably covered some just now. There are more promotion opportunities because there are so many management levels. When you are ready for promotion, then there will be a potential step up for you in the organisation due to the number of layers available. If you look at schools, that's not a particularly tall structure, but if you're an unpromoted teacher, you can then move on to be a principal teacher, a faculty head, and then you can move on to be a deputy head and then a head teacher and so on. That's what we mean by promotion opportunities. Employees should know their immediate boss because of the narrow span of control. Your boss has more time to be able to get to know you. You have more time to be able to get to know them well. So that should give a good working relationship. There are clear lines of responsibility and communication. Everybody in the organisation is responsible to a manager, and that gives this clear line of communication. So if that manager happens to be unavailable, then the member of staff will go to the next person in the communication channel, i.e. the person that their boss would be in charge of, responsible to. Disadvantages, however, we've talked about the many layers of communication, which can really slow it down. Decision making can be much slower as a result, which means that your competitors could maybe get in before you. If it's some change that's going to be made, your competitors may be able to make that change before you if their structure is not as tall as yours. And of course, there will be higher staff costs, labour costs, due to the number of management levels and the number of people who are going to be paid a promoted salary. The opposite of that is a flat structure. Now, the diagram we've got here is a very flat structure, but you will find there are not many levels of management in that. You tend to find with the taller structures, these are prevalent in the public sector, for example, the police force, the army, the fire service, council offices. All of these organisations tend to have a taller structure. With the flatter structure, these tend to be more prevalent in the private sector because these guys are profit making, and the result of that is that they're trying to cut corners when it comes to paying staff. So they really don't want to be paying too many levels of management. However, I'm not saying they don't exist there, but they are not as common as they would be perhaps in the public sector. So you've got fewer levels of management. The result of that is a shorter chain of command. The number of members of staff that information and decisions have to go through are way less than they would be in the taller structure, which means that decision making can be a lot quicker. However, managers will have this thing called a wider span of control, which means they're in charge of a lot more staff. That can be problematic when staff are trying to get to know their boss, trying to vie for some of their boss's attention, to get a question answered. They might find it's a lot difficult, which can be stressful both for the employee and for the manager. Decision making is obviously much quicker because of the shorter chain of command. Advantages and disadvantages, once again, we've probably covered a fair few of these. Employees have more responsibility and authority. Because there are fewer managers, you tend to find that employees are more empowered, meaning that they will have to do perhaps some of the work that the manager would normally do. They maybe have to make decisions themselves because the manager's not available to take them for them. So they tend to be more empowered, which can be good for the employee because they're getting way more experience. Decision making, as we've mentioned, is much quicker, and communication channels are less complicated in that it's very, very apparent who you are responsible to because the chain of command is so short. However, employees, as we say, have got a greater workload because you find that they maybe have to make decisions that they wouldn't normally make if they were in a taller structure, and there are fewer promotion opportunities because you've not got the same number of management levels for employees to go through. As we've said, with the wide span of control, staff may feel isolated or ignored, and they may not be able to do their job properly because they can't make the next step because the manager's maybe too busy dealing with someone else. While we're talking about flatter structures, the way that an organisation can flatter its structure is by using something called delayering. And delayering involves cutting out levels of management within the organisation, leading to this flatter triangle. Now, what's really important to note here is organisations do not delayer necessarily to get rid of staff. They delayer to try and speed up communication and decision making in the organisation, and to cut costs from the point of view that you are not paying as many promoted staff. It's not a reason for cutting staff. Staff may be cut because there are maybe too many people end up in one level, but delayering is not for the sole purpose of cutting staff, which is really important if you're answering an exam question on this. So advantages, you'll notice, will be quite similar to the flatter structure. You're saving money on paying salaries of management. There's quicker decision making and communication because of this flatter structure. Therefore, it makes you more responsive to changes in the market. Changes can take place a lot quicker because the decision making is quicker, and there will be this thing called a wider span of control. I would tend to say that could be a disadvantage from the point of view of staff not vying for the boss's attention. The disadvantage is then fewer promotion opportunities for staff. If you have staff being made redundant, you hope not to really have too many of them. You will still have to fork out some kind of redundancy payment for them, which can cost you a significant amount of money, depending upon the employee's position and the length of time that they have been in the organisation or with the organisation. And organisations could lose key members of staff when it is reorganised. Staff may be falling to lower levels who were actually really good bosses, but that level of management has now been done away with. This next slide here is just showing you a YouTube video on tall and flat structures and trying to distinguish between them both, which is well worth a watch. The next type of structure is a matrix structure, and a matrix structure is like a kind of noughts and crosses type situation where employees are put into projects to carry out specific tasks in an organisation. Now, the best example of this are things like house builders, where they have a number of sites building houses all over the country. They will have a project team at each of the different sites, and they are carrying out their specific task on the site. So what you'll find is the team members will all come from different functional areas. So you'll have like brickies, you'll have plumbers, you'll have a site manager who's in charge of the overall operation, you'll have someone in charge of sales, you'll have someone in charge of groundwork and gardening, you'll have surveyors, etc. They have all got a specific skill set. Everyone in the team has got the same level of responsibility, and they will be answerable to the project boss, the person who is the manager of the project. Now, in a house building type situation, on a house building site, the site manager is the project manager. Now, what's important to note here is that back at the head office or at the main place of work, the employee will also have a boss. So on the site, the employee will be responsible to the project manager, but they will be overall, they will be responsible to the sales manager if they're the salesperson, they'll be responsible to the technical manager if they're the surveyor or the engineer or whatever back at head office. So these people will have two structures. Now the advantages in this, two bosses should I say, the advantages of matrix structures are there will be increased experience because there are lots and lots of different skills, which should lead to good motivation and job satisfaction for staff because they're mixing with people with different skills. And they're good for tackling complex problems because of the number of specialisms that are in the project. However, it's expensive to have a large number of teams because you're kind of duplicating resources throughout the country. For example, if you're using the house builder, there may be coordination problems trying to find everyone working together and carrying out their particular task in the project. They could be clashing or conflicting or whatever. And there could be confusion as to who reports to whom. The problem we have there is with the boss back at the head office, are you answerable to them for that particular problem, or are you responsible to or answerable to the project manager? So that can cause a bit of confusion. What's really important about the matrix structure is once that project is finished, then the team disbands and they move on to either together or separately different projects, new projects that come up. So the project will only be for the length of time it takes to carry out that task, and then the project team will break up and go to a new project together, or maybe separately they may be broken up and go to different ones. And that's really important. Once again, there's a link here on this slide for matrix structures. Have a wee look at it. Entrepreneurial structures are our fourth structure, and you tend to find that these take place in small businesses. The best way of describing how the shape of this would be like the spokes of a wheel with the hub of the wheel in the middle. The hub of the wheel would be the entrepreneur or the boss, and the spokes would be all of the staff answerable to that person. Another example, I've put a graphic here of a newspaper, and another example of an entrepreneurial structure of where it would be used would be in a fast-paced business. So if you think of a newspaper being created and turned out every single day, printed every single day, there has to be a really fast turnaround. So the editor of the newspaper would be the hub, as in the boss, and all the people in charge of the different sections of the newspaper would be round the spokes of the wheel, and they would be given direction by the entrepreneur and told to carry out their job. There's not an awful lot of time for discussion because the paper has to have a quick turnaround. And it's the same with a smaller business where the entrepreneur is the owner, and the owner will have the sole decision-making powers, so they will be firing out information to all of their different staff. Advantages then and disadvantages of an entrepreneurial structure. Decisions are made quickly. Staff know who they're accountable to because they're normally accountable to one person or a small group of people who make the decisions. And what's important here is the decision maker does not need to consult staff, either because there's no time or because they are the owner of the business. Disadvantages of an entrepreneurial structure are it can cause stress and inefficiency because there's a sole decision maker, and maybe they feel a lot of stress and they're maybe not always making the best decisions, so they can be inefficient, and it can also create a heavy workload for these people. And finally, if some members of unpromoted staff actually have some really good ideas, unfortunately they're not really listened to, so you're actually stifling their initiative or their creativity, which can be unfortunate too. The next type of structure, well, we're going to look at two here. We're going to look at centralised and decentralised structures. The centralised structures are where decisions come from the top. Control and decision making lie with top management in the head office. So for example, if we look at Greif High School, a centralised structure would be where Mr. Johnson is making all the decisions that all the departments abide by, so that he's having pretty much a very similar way for all the departments to be carrying out the different tasks and putting forward the different policies. Advantages then are decisions can be made for the whole organisation. So in the likes of Greif High School, Mr. Johnson would be making decisions for the whole school. It's easier to promote a corporate image because you are, if we remember back to corporate culture, there's a set way of doing something, there's a set way of carrying out tasks, and that's all part of corporate culture. So you're promoting the company's corporate image a lot better, and you can benefit from economies of scale because the whole school are going to be doing the same thing. So it could be all the departments buy in a similar way, then orders are going through in bulk, for example, for plain white paper for the printer. And what that would mean is the school could perhaps benefit from cut costs there, because they are ordering things in large scale. Disadvantages, however, decision making can be slow, because Mr. Johnson would have to make sure that all the departments are buying into that, and he's got to get an okay from all of them, yes, everything's fine, before things can take place, which can lead to slower decision making, which makes communication slower as well, obviously. And once again, staff in departments could have really good ideas that they're not able to use, so there's less room for staff initiative. The opposite of these are decentralised structures, and this would be where in Greif High School the faculty heads and principal teachers would all have their own way and be able to have their own way of running their own departments. So what that would mean is the departments are maybe all run differently, they all do things in a different way, but it makes decision making quicker, and it makes your business more responsive to change, because you'll be able to make decisions quickly and you'll be able to keep up with competitors, for example, in the business world. Control and decision making are delegated to departments, is what we've said there, and it means that senior managers are relieved from some of the more routine day-to-day decisions. In other words, some of the decision making, and this is what happens in Greif, some of the decision making is made in a centralised fashion from Mr. Johnson, and then he will leave departments to some of the more mundane, routine day-to-day decisions, and they can carry these tasks out the way that they plan to, the way that they would like to. Advantages and disadvantages then: staff feel more empowered and motivated because they're getting a chance to make decisions, and your decisions can match local needs. So for example, in a multinational company, you may decide that you're going to decentralise your structure, so that means that the managers of each of the branches of the multinational can do things their way, and they can then match their decisions to local needs, which can be a lot better, and your business can then react quickly to changing external factors. In different parts of the world, things may be different, so that branch of your organisation can match their decision to react to the needs of that particular country or area or whatever. Disadvantages, however, the decisions are differing from the branches, so it means that it's not a kind of corporate structure, if you like, and if staff are moving between branches of organisations, things are done differently in different branches, then it might take them a bit longer to catch on to the way that these practices are carried out in these organisations, which can be confusing. For example, in a branch of a bank, one bank may do something one way, one bank may do it another way, and if a member of staff is moving from branch to branch, then they have to learn the different ways of carrying out a particular task according to the branch they're in, which can be a bit awkward. And obviously the situation here with there being less supervision, because departments are having their own way of doing things, then the senior managers, the centralised managers, are not having the same supervision, so things might not go according to plan. Now, what you've got to understand here is structures are where you are trying to fit staff into the organisation, how your staff fit into the organisation. We're now going to look at groupings, and groupings are how you actually group the activities, what your organisation is doing. And this is the list here, and we're going to cover each of these in turn: functional, product or service, customer, location, or we call it a geographical grouping as well, technology, and a line and staff grouping, and we're just going to look at these in turn. Functional groupings are where you have departments where staff have similar skills and expertise and they do similar jobs. So you've got marketing, you've got operations, you've got HR, you've got finance. If you look at the school again, all of our departments are split up according to the different subjects that they teach, and that makes them a functional grouping. So the staff and the activities are grouped according to the function, and once again we've mentioned some of these different groupings that can be used here in the normal organisation. This little baby organisation chart here gives you an example of how it would look, and then the staff for marketing would obviously go under the marketing manager, operations the same, finance and HR, and so on. As far as a functional grouping is concerned, there are advantages. It allows the staff in that particular department to specialise in what they do best. So you're able to get some information from some of your colleagues if there's something that you're not sure about, because they know as much as you do about that, or the same sort of topics and things as you do. There is a clear organisational structure. A functional grouping does give you a clear organisational structure. And what you'll find is when we look at the other groupings, you tend to find that within these other groupings, organisations will eventually resort back to a functional grouping because it's the easiest way to organise your activities in an organisation. Staff are aware of the formal relationships, so you know the marketing director will be responsible perhaps for marketing supervisors or managers or people in charge of different aspects of marketing. So it makes it very clear who the relationship, how the relationships are set out in that particular organisation. The organisation may become too large and uncontrollable. If you are an organisation that very much spends a lot of time marketing their products, your marketing department can become so big that it can become uncontrollable. Your finance department could become so big that once again it becomes uncontrollable, and that's the problem with a functional grouping. With wanting to keep all of these members of staff together, your organisation can become, or you're a bit too large in certain areas. And because they're so large and they're maybe kind of set in their ways a little bit, it could be that they become unresponsive to change, which can be difficult if you're trying to compete with other organisations in your industry. Another problem with functional groupings can be that the departments might compete against each other. For example, in Greif, us in the business and computing department might not be particularly happy if they see the English department getting more money or the maths department getting more equipment or whatever. And these things can happen in organisations where departments can compete against each other and the rivalry might not be very healthy. The next grouping is a product or service grouping. Remember, when we talk about products, we also talk about services as well. So that's why we've got these two lumped together. And this is where you've got divisions or departments where each one deals with a different product or product range. Now, we looked at some of the big conglomerates when we looked at integration, when we looked at conglomerate integration, and we had P&G, Procter & Gamble, and we had Unilever. Now, these are organisations that have a large number of different products, and there will be different specialists, different people in charge of the different products or services, and that's what we call a product or service grouping. Now, we've given a kind of easy example here, and we've picked Sky, and Sky has got a number of different departments, if you like. They've got Sky Sports, they've got movies, they've got different channels, and each division will have its own functional staff. So that was what I was saying earlier on about your product or service grouping eventually resorting back to, within Sky Sports there'll be functional staff, within Sky Movies there'll be functional staff, and so on. Other examples of organisations that have product or service groupings would be things like Virgin, who have got cruises and flights and trains, and Virgin Money, they've got Virgin Mobiles, etc., and General Electric, which are a great big electrical company who deal with a very large number of electrical goods. So this is a kind of layout. We've used the example of Tesco here, maybe pushing it a little bit with the petrol stations, but Tesco have got supermarkets, they've got petrol stations, they've got their banking branch, and they've also got mobile phones. So that would be a product or service grouping, and within the supermarkets there would be a functional grouping, and so on along the list of the different products that they offer. Advantages of a product or service grouping: each division is self-contained, they very much do their own thing, and it means that as a product or service grouping, they can become more responsive to customer changes in tastes or fashions because they're very much keeping their eye on what they do. And it's easier to identify low sales in products. So for P&G, they can see with the different product or service groupings, they can actually see which products are maybe not selling so fast. Disadvantages: duplication. What we're really meaning here is all your products or services are going to have a group of staff, and what that will have to be is they'll have to have them duplicated. For every product or service, there's going to be staff for each of the different products or services, which can cost a lot of money. And once again, we have this issue with the divisions maybe competing with each other to try and do better, to try and get more funding, etc., and that can be a problem. The next one's a customer grouping, and that's where you're dealing with different types of customers. It might be different divisions based on distribution. For example, we've got retail, as in shops, we've got online, you might have international branches, and all of these different customers will have a different grouping, a different set of people in charge. Now, what we've got here is a travel company, just an example of something like TUI or whatever, where they've maybe got holidays for families, young people 18 to 30 type holidays, just sort of couples quiet holidays, and for your older travellers. And that would be a very good example of a customer grouping. And what you're wanting there is you're wanting staff who would be looking at each of the different types of customers' needs so that they can address them well enough. So each division has got varying customer needs because they're all looking for different things. If you look at the travel companies and how different types of customer are looking for different typed holidays. You've also got customer loyalty. Perhaps there might be more of a personal touch because the customers feel that they're actually getting this attentive care and that the company really knows them well, etc. And you can respond quickly to customers' changing needs and tastes as well, sorry. It can be expensive again because of the duplication of effort, different staff in charge of the different branches, which is just the same thing as your expense. And it might be that customers are used to dealing with particular members of staff, and if they leave, then that personal relationship is lost. So personal relationships can really be built up in a customer grouping, and that can be difficult if they go. The next one we're going to look at is a location or geographical grouping, and this is where your staff are divided into different divisions. It could be, for example, within the UK, or it could be worldwide. And here is just another little organisation chart showing you how that could look of different branches in Scotland here. Once again, the advantages are you're catering for different local, regional or national tastes. So if you have, for example, a branch of McDonald's, which is based all over the world, then these different branches can cater for the customers' individual tastes in those particular branches abroad, which is really good because it's going to give you more sales. So it makes you more responsive to customer needs. However, once again, like all of these groupings, you will have a duplication of effort and staff costs because you've got all the same staff in the different branches throughout the world or throughout the country or whatever it happens to be. We're now moving on to a technological grouping, which is where your manufacturing companies tend to come in, and they are grouping their business activities according to the production process. They tend to be only suitable for large organisations with different products and production processes. So if you pick, for example, Heinz, Heinz has a large number of products, and these products may be made using different production processes, different types of technology, which means the organisation will have to have different groupings for these different types of technology. What we've got here is we've maybe got an oil and gas company, for example. If you take Shell or BP or whatever, you've got different types of technology required for extracting the oil from the ground, for refining it, for changing it into the different derivatives of oil, and then the distribution, for example, through petrol stations on shop shelves with oil for your car, etc. And they will also require some kind of R&D to find these oil wells, to find sources of oil. So all of these different areas for the oil and gas company, for example, if you look at extractions primary, then secondary, then tertiary, and then quaternary, they are going to require different production processes, and that is going to make them have this technology grouping. So advantages would be there would be increased specialisation, because for the extraction staff, they would be very much well aware of how to do that and concentrate on that and do it better. For your refinery staff, the same, and so on. There can be easy ways of finding out if there are any technological problems that are not working with your technology, because you are dealing with only that technology for the particular task that you're doing, which can be good. And once again, economies of scale. Technology can actually output so much more than humans, which we'll look at a bit more under operations, and that means that the organisation will be able to output so much more, reducing average costs. Disadvantages would be that you would actually have to have specialist training required for your staff to operate the equipment, and with the skills required, they may require higher salaries, which would obviously cost the company money. It is a very capital intensive organisation, which can be bad for the organisation from the point of not employing a lot of staff, staff redundancies, etc. It could be emitting for example, pollution. All of these things can make the organisation, the capital intensive part, not so good. Just looking now, these are the different types of groupings, and I hope they've been kind of clear to you. What we now need to look at is the removal of, we're talking about downsizing now, and downsizing is different from delayering. Delayering is where you're trying to remove levels of management from an organisation to make communication and decision making quicker, and to also cut your wage bill by paying less promoted staff. Downsizing is a totally different thing, because by downsizing you are trying to shrink your organisation altogether to try and cut costs. It will lead to staff redundancies. So it involves the removal of certain areas of the organisation's activities that are not directly linked to the core activities. It could be closing a branch, a factory or a division because it's maybe not doing so well. Some activities might be outsourced to allow the business to concentrate on its core activities. So it could be, for example, you decide to do away with a large number of your HR staff because you've decided to outsource your HR activities because you don't hire staff that often, and staff are sitting there recruiting and selecting, but they're not really doing enough. It could also be that you decide to merge two departments. For example, a large number of organisations tend to put their sales and their marketing department staff together to form one department, therefore trying to cut staff numbers to try and cut costs. So downsizing is all about reducing the size of your business to perhaps deal with external factors, maybe recessions, or the business is not doing so well and they're trying to actually cut their costs to be able to try and compete a bit more favourably. So the good things are your costs are cut. You may be losing a factory, which means that you're cutting your rent. You will be losing staff, which means you're cutting a wage bill. So that can be an advantage for the organisation. It makes the business more efficient, and it means that they can be more competitive. So if you are outsourcing activities that you could actually do that and you don't need to do yourself, it can make you concentrate, if we remember back to outsourcing, make you concentrate on the things that you can do best, and you can become more efficient at them. However, valuable skills can be lost when redundancies are made. You could be losing staff who are absolutely fantastic, who do a great job for your organisation, but unfortunately their length of service or the job they do means that you can't keep them and you're losing great skills. And finally, your remaining staff, those who are still there, might feel demotivated. They might feel a bit more vulnerable because they wonder when it's maybe going to be their turn. A lot of organisations during this coronavirus outbreak have downsized, some of them quite drastically, in order to try and stay in business. And the job there is trying to make sure that the remaining staff still manage to be motivated, even though there will be a constant worry that they may be next if there is perhaps another lockdown and businesses have to close again. Okay, so what I would like you to do is make sure that you read this very carefully, listen to some of the points I've made, make sure you've read your notes, and of course the PowerPoint presentations are there for you. So please, not the PowerPoint presentations, the videos are there. Please make sure that you have a wee look through the videos because they can give you some